Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Here on Earth.
Welcome or welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, Peter Robbins. Last week, my guest was Stephen Bassett, a good friend and one of, for me, the great minds and activists really in the history of UFO studies. We pre-recorded the show because I knew that a week from that point, namely a week ago today at about this time, I would be just getting off of my second flight, having gotten up at 3 a.m. in Denver and made my way back here from this year's International MUFON Symposium, and would not be up for doing a live show. And very briefly, before we get rolling with tonight's guest, I just wanted to say congratulations, Mutual UFO Network. A very well-produced and well-attended symposium this year with a lot of great speakers, and very nice to see so many colleagues, old friends, make some new friends, together again at a live event here in America. Hopefully it is the harbinger of more live events as we move forward, not to completely forget that we still need to be aware that we are in a period of time. We should watch out for our health and follow protocols to whatever degree you feel are appropriate, and concerned about the next person as well as yourself. It was great being back in Denver as well, although, as is usually the case in events like this, you don't have much time to explore your host city. You're on the job. But it was also nice to be in a hotel that was in actually downtown Denver, rather than out by the airport or someplace where you are highly isolated. It is a great city, and I hope to return sooner than later to explore it again for first time in some years. That said, this show's guest is an old friend and close colleague of mine. Melinda Leslie is a lifelong UFO abductee who has been public with both her own extraterrestrial and covert-ops human abduction experiences for 30 years. She is considered by many to be the authority on a military and intelligence agency involvement in the UFO extraterrestrial abduction phenomena. Her extensive abduction research and personal experiences have been featured in more than 30 books by prominent authors in ufology. Melinda has been an investigator in the UFO field for 32 years and has researched individuals involved in its cover-up for 30 of those years. She is also the owner of UFO Sighting Tours in Sedona, Arizona, where she has conducted over 1,500 plus tours with using military night vision goggles. Her websites are, and we'll go over this again at the end of the show, alienexperiences.com/Melinda Leslie, Sedona wagesstore.com/Melinda, SedonaWageStore.com, and that's for UFO tours, and SedonaWageStore.com ET contact, SuperSoldierSummit.com as well. And with that, welcome, Melinda, to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hi there. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'll just tell everyone, those websites are not correct. So let me just make it super easy. The
Please.
website is, and I don't know if our person helping KJRA can change it down under the, above the video or whatever, but the website is UFO Sighting Tours, tours with an S. So UFO Sighting Tours.com. That's it. And that's all my information is
Great.
there.
Wonderful and much easier.
Yes.
You and I had the great fun of reconnecting in corporeal three-dimensional form only a week ago
Yes.
in Denver for the first time in years. And how good to see you again. And what was your impression of the symposium?
Oh, it was, well, first off, I want to say, Peter, it was so good to see you. It had been quite a number of years. Peter and I have become great friends on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, but being able to, see each other in person has been many years. So it was really, really great to see you. The conference was amazing. The folks with Colorado MUFON
Mm,
and Marquetta with the office did it, MUFON office did an
yes.
amazing job. And no, it was really, really well done and really fun. And it was, for newer people out there, because I know you and I are sharing this a lot on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. And without conferences going on for a while, we have this whole batch of what I'll say are younger people, at least, Peter, younger, not you and me, right?
Easy enough.
Yeah, no, yeah, in all fairness, but that crowd on Facebook and Twitter, particularly the Twitter crowd, haven't been to conferences, or very
Yeah.
few of them. I know Joe Merger's been to conferences and a few others, but it's like, you guys go to the conferences. Nothing replaces meeting up with people in person.
Yeah.
Yes, there's the lectures, but it's like the dinners and the meetings and the conversations in the
Yeah.
hallways, and almost become more important than the lectures. Sometimes they
Yeah.
do. So
Yeah.
I cannot recommend enough. Go. You'll feel like you're part of your tribe, part of your community, like-minded, and you'll get to put faces to the names. It's I so glad we're doing conferences again. I miss them so much.
Yeah. And you brought up some very good points. Number one, between MUFON and the Sheraton Hotel itself, it was really, really well produced.
Yes.
And the space that we had for the conference was phenomenal. I mean, it
Oh,
was
the hotel.
thousands
Yeah.
of square feet.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing is, especially if you've not attended events like this, I think one tends to think that the speakers are, like movie stars housed in their trailers, except when they come out to give their presentations and then, slink back with their
Yeah.
sunglasses on, no autographs, please, and, bring my little sandwiches to my dressing room. Everybody, even the best known people, are amazingly accessible and right there to talk with, to ask questions from. It is a place where new friendships are made, where old friendships are deepened,
Yes.
and it's really important part of it for me because any field of highly specialized study can be kind of cloistering, and individuals can at periods of time certainly take themselves overly seriously, and this
Yeah.
is a serious field, but life is about having fun too.
That's right.
And a lot of fun was had. And it was great to see people connecting deep into the evening, just sitting and having conversations over drinks and joking and having a good time, as well as sharing information, learning stuff, hearing the latest presentations from well known, better known, and up and coming presenters in the field. So,
Yes. Yeah.
bravo, MUFON. They did a great job.
Well, for the 3 or 4 days you're at a conference, it's a party the entire time. There are parties that happen. People are meeting up in the restaurants and in the bar, this was at a beautiful Sheraton, like you said, and had a beautiful lobby in the hotel where people kept meeting up. And there were parties going on in people's rooms, long story there, but, it's really, really fun. And like you said, you're interfacing with the speakers all the time. You're having
Yeah.
food and drink and conversation with them, everything from in the hallways and lobby and restaurants to, and so you really get to know them. Again, I miss the conferences. There's no
Yeah.
replacing them. I
Yeah.
I recommend to all the new people in the field, I'll go ahead and say International UFO Congress is coming up in Phoenix in
Mm,
October. Look it up online, International UFO Congress, and be there. Karen Barard, who produces that, does an amazing job. It's
she
going to be
does.
a phenomenal conference.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who the lineup is, but you guys, it's almost like it does. Yes, of course, it matters who's speaking, but it almost matters more that everyone will be attending. Encourage, particularly the younger crowd, encourage your friends and people in Twitter and whatnot to be there, because it is, again, meeting everyone in person, getting to sit, getting that interaction. There's no replacement for it.
I would even add to that, because there are so many more conferences in the Southwest and the West than there are here in the East and the Northeast. And we have a terrific one coming up Labor Day weekend. I'm very proud to be a co-founder of it. It's the Exeter, New
Oh,
Hampshire
wonderful. Yeah.
UFO Festival and Conference. And that will be over that full Labor Day weekend coming up in early September. And among our speakers this year, besides myself, will be Kathleen Marden. It will
Wonderful.
be a rare but very welcome appearance for the very distinguished Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Ralph Blumenthal, whose biography of Dr. John Mack is
Yes.
absolutely must reading for anybody in the field. So that would be, again, Exeter UFO Festival and Conference. Google it and go get them. So to begin with, you have such a long and highly specialized involvement in the field of UFO studies, but you also, separate from it and part of it, run this very special company out of beautiful Sedona,
Yes.
Arizona, where you take people on tours. And we're going to get to that later. But I wanted to start at the beginning to some degree. Where were you born, Melinda?
Oh, God. Um, Well, I was born in Southern California. Technically, the hospital was in Santa Monica, California, and I grew up living in the Palos Verdes area.
Can you tell us a little bit about your parents or siblings or your family life growing up?
Yeah, well, I'm the youngest of five, and my parents are both passed. My siblings are kind of spread out, but I'm very, very, thank God, even with all this, it can be for someone who's an abductee. I'm extremely close to my family, thank God, and I'm very blessed by that. And yeah, grew up, your basic Southern California lifestyle, beach community. You know, uh, my brother was a surfer. Grew up skiing, too, as well as that. And had that very quintessential Southern California in the 60s and 70s lifestyle.
Great. I'm imagining that when you were growing up, elementary school, junior high school level, you were not aiming for a career in the world of UFO studies. What were your dreams and fantasies about what
Oh,
you were going to be when you grew up?
I don't know. Well, Peter, here's a small known thing, and um, but I'll admit, I, as a kid, wanted to do modeling, because I did some of that starting at a very young age, up until I was in my early 20s. And I was a lot thinner then, thinner and younger. But yes, I did that, and some theater stuff. At one point in high school, I thought I'd get into either archaeology or geology. I love
Ah,
earth study stuff, and I love old stuff. I still love history
yeah.
and archaeology. But I just wasn't serious enough about the sciences and whatnot, and I wasn't serious about it. I ended up going from high school to Orange Coast College, where my major was kind of dance, and so that's another thing I always did my whole life. And just out of high school and into college, I got a I was interviewing at Disneyland and became a dancer at Disneyland. So these are
Oh,
little
wow.
things not that many people know about me. People know me a long time know, but I danced at Disneyland for about 6 years in various shows and parades. And And there you go. And then got
Great.
office jobs, and then I just kept doing office work till I fell into ufology.
Now, at a certain age, did you have a pronounced awareness that something was different about your life and childhood than other kids, or was it
Yes.
kind of subliminal and you came to understand it later? Can you tell us a little about how you began to, become aware of these unusual experiences and what actually they were?
Sure. Well, there's kind of two stories running side to side, if you will, about
Hmm.
that. One is I was always psychic, okay, and came to terms with that when I was in high school. Boyfriend and I met a psychic teacher, started going classes in her house, which even through college, because I remained in Southern California, I remained in classes with her for about 7 years. And we were doing all forms of psychic, paranormal, work then. And so that was kind of, and a fair amount of what you would call metaphysics and spirituality and everything spiritual. I was studying alternative religions, and I was brought up very Catholic. I always say I never really left it. I just added to it. I added a lot to it. Yeah. I like how you laugh. That's perfect. And and that kind of was my focus, and I did that on the side. Aside from those other things I talked about, this was always on the side. I had an interest in paranormal metaphysical things as a little kid, um, but didn't really start really studying, researching, reading till I was, like I said, in high school. And then ever since, I am a reader here at the Center for New Age in Sedona. And I always did it on the side till I moved here 11 years ago. But then, because everyone wants to know probably the UFO thing, and I know you were getting there, is in 1989, one of my kind of, paranormal metaphysical friends, who had a big interest in Native American studies,
Hmm.
fell onto what was then Billy Goodman's The Happening radio program being broadcast out of Las Vegas. And they were having Native American elders on, which is someone she worked with, and she worked in a law office, turned her on to the show. She was listening to it for about 2 weeks with Native American elders, and then all of a sudden the storyline changed, and they had veteran researcher John Lear on, who's now no longer with us,
Sure.
passed recently. John Lear on, talking about what we now know as the Bob Lazar story. And this was 1989, and it was the breaking of all that. Um, and she was listening to this and said, now I was having abductions my whole life, but at this point did not know it. Okay. As is often the case, as you
Yes.
well know, with abductees. And she fell onto this, and they were talking about going out to Highway 375 in the Nevada desert, Area 51, and having sightings. And a number of researchers were on who had been out there with Lear and Lazar. And she said, she turned me on to it on like a Tuesday night or maybe Monday night. On a Tuesday night, this was September of '89, or last week of August, maybe. Anyways, she said, she turned me on to the show. I started listening. They said, anyone who wants to go out there, people were calling in saying, where do we
Oh,
go on Highway 375? Anyways, that following Friday, so like from Tuesday to Friday we're driving out there. And that's how fast that happened. So I went out to Area 51, had amazing sightings.
ah,
And there was a big group of people out there. There were 40 or 50 of us out there at the time seeing this. Um, we stayed out there for a couple nights having sightings. We went back 2 weeks later and a month after that. So in a 2-month window, I took 3 back-to-back trips out to Area 51, Rachel, Nevada, for many, many nights, and having incredible sightings, meeting researchers. I met Bill Hamilton there, famous researcher. I know you know him. And we became very good friends, and other researchers. And that was the beginning of my involvement in ufology.
let me jump in and ask you kind of follow-up question. Number one, did you feel then not that we really were aware of what would become known as drone technology. Or do you feel now that some of the phenomena, at least that you were seeing, was us rather than them?
Um, no, back then, and I'll tell you why. We were seeing things absolutely defy physics, as I or anybody with me had understandings of, and researchers out there. We saw stuff, for instance, even our first night out there was a cloud coverage of probably about a ceiling of about 10 or 12,000 feet. These objects popped out of the clouds, I'm sorry, popped out of the clouds, shot off sideways, shot off sideways, shot off sideways, you know, and or drop, stopped, and then would do the infamous falling leaf pattern. Do that on camera. There we go. Falling leaf pattern, and drop down to the base. They'd shoot up from the base, stop, go off at an angle, shoot through the clouds. I'm like going, I don't think in '89 we had mastered the reverse engineering at that point to do
Yeah,
that.
that's pretty classic.
Yeah, and then one night we had a big craft, well, 2 nights, long story short, but one of those nights, a big craft that came, circled around us, came up behind us where we were on Highway 375. There's mountains behind us, came over us, and I was out there with a group of people. It was a particularly cold night. We were really bundled up. So that wasn't in September. That was like, a year later. So we're really bundled up. And coming over us is this object lit up blue, comes over almost like it had headlights on it, but no sound. So we're going, we don't think that's a plane. That's a big object, completely soundless, lit up so bright we couldn't really make out just the distinct shape. But then all of a sudden, it did the weirdest thing. It shot off, like the craft came moving, almost stopped, and then shot like a laser. Not it shot a laser from it, like it took off so fast it was a streak in the sky, and then that streak disappeared. And it was real interesting, Peter. There was like a point that showed up, went like, okay, here's the craft, right? Sends out this laser, this beam, okay, goes zoop, and then it was like the beam went out, stopped, and then the other end caught up with it. So it went zoop, zoop, like that, and disappeared. And then
Interesting.
there were sparkles in the air, like falling all over the place, like we were seeing the results of a plasma or field effect
Yeah.
breaking up,
Yeah.
to see all this stuff shimmering down. And it happened so fast, the whole thing. And we were like, what did we just see? But something taking off so fast, it looks like a streak,
Yeah.
and instantly disappearing and then leaving a field effect behind it. Again, I don't think we had anything doing that back then.
No, what a real life changer. And I'm real curious to know again about what time of night was this and about how many people were together experiencing this.
Well, different, because I went out there many times in a row with different groups, and we'd get out there and there'd be other people out there.
Sure.
That first time there were easily 40 or 50 people. Um, I didn't do an exact count, but easily at least that, maybe more. Actually, now I think about probably more like 60 or 70. But and then the crowd, as we remained out there, dwindled down. And then like that time that we saw that thing zip off, it was just myself and 3 friends. So it was just the 4 of us that time. I've seen structured craft out there like that time, but we couldn't really make out the shape. But one time, a daytime sighting out there of a huge giant disc, like a big silver pancake in the sky from a distance, because we first saw it at a distance and we were in our car and we gunned it to get closer. We had gotten off 375 onto 93, and so Ash Springs area, if you've ever been out there, and we
Yeah.
gunned it and we got closer, and that's we could see it was like a big flat big disc, but at a distance it looked, it's about 3 or 4 inches long at arm's length, and it looked like a sword blade hanging in the sky, like a saber sword blade
Yeah.
reflecting the sunlight. And we gunned it to get closer. Unfortunately did not get a picture of it. There was kind of an argument in the car about pull over to get a picture, no, speed up, and we sped up, and unfortunately we didn't get a picture. But it was just an amazing structured craft sighting. And so and Peter, having all those sightings on all those trips, the first 3 trips and then subsequent ones, but let's start with those first 3 trips in September and October of '89. Mostly first one might have been last week of August. but those 3 back-to-back trips, having sightings every night, including structure craft, was like inserting a key and turning it, because I
Huh.
started to have memories come forward of abduction experiences, childhood, young child, teenage and adult abduction experiences. And I thought I was losing my mind. Someone in the field recommended a therapist to me, and I started the whole investigation process to say, am I going crazy? And of course, I worked with that
As we know,
therapist, the
this
late
is
Dr.
an
Deborah Troncalli.
extremely common pattern that we see with
Yeah.
folks
And Peter,
who
just because I know you have such a past connection to Bud Hopkins, um, and closely associated with him, that Dr. Deborah Troncalli was an associate of his, and I too became friends with Bud initially through Deborah Troncalli, and then conferences and events and whatnot too.
absolutely can with the therapist that you worked with, was it kind of talk recall, or at a certain point did you do any regressive
Oh,
hypnosis
sure.
yeah,
Well, I always
and
say I remember about 80% of my experiences, 80% of the time. That's pretty accurate. I had a
got it.
lot of memory. And then I started, not only was it recalling the past experiences that those sightings caused me to start to recall, I mean, very vividly, like a couple of experiences when I was very young as a child. My grandmother had a place in, of all places, Landers, California, where out near where Giant Rock, the Integratron, all that is. Um, but she lived out there in the middle of nowhere where her little house was. And I had experiences while staying at that little house of my grandmother's. But those memories were coming forward. But then I started to have new current experiences. So in late 89, early 90, I was having new current things. And then I had roommates in 1990 who witnessed things going on with me, you know. And so not only was it past memories, I had new memories, I was having conscious memory, and yes, I got regressive hypnosis for the parts that were blocked or missing, you know um, to help fill in the details, but
But again, to stress that you, once the memories started to return, and it is a natural process that not only can I relate to, I lived it
yes,
for just the one event that I had as a child, the overwhelmingly unambiguous sighting I had with my sister Helen, that
sure,
I was able to repress for so many years, and then it released. And she never forgot. And of course, there's an area in the middle where, like you say, uh, having the experiences you had out with those people in 89 near Area 51, uh, that is a life changing event and can certainly be
absolutely
a
was.
trigger. So, to distinguish here, because we're about to go into two areas of study, the classic abduction experience, usually identified with beings that we've come to call grays, or another type, but those are the ones that are most prevalent. And then this whole area of military UFO um, abduction experiences, where the military is either mimicking the other intelligences modus operandi and the reasoning behind that, but staying for the moment with the experiences with other intelligences. Can
Hmm.
you give us an example of what you remember of interfacing with
Oh,
beings
so
that
much.
were not
uh,
us?
it's so much, Peter. I've had I'm one of those
Just an
lifelong abduct.
example.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a lifelong abductee. I've had many, many experiences. I've even been taken with other people. Here, okay, just some quick highlights. Um, as a child, for instance, and of course that was memory that came after 1989, or at 1989, and then some hypnosis also regarding that. But I remembered being put down for a nap at the age 5 at my grandmother's place in the desert. Everyone went into town to go do something. One adult stayed behind to babysit me. They were reading a book on the couch in the living room. My grandmother had this tiny little homestead in the middle of nowhere, little single bed, twin bed, and I'm on there. And I always had this memory that little kids came to the bedroom window and wanted me to go play with them.
Hmm.
And everyone came back from whatever they went and did in town. I think going to a movie or something, but they came back. And here, uh, I said I went outside and played with little kids. I this idea that I had gone out and played with little kids, and they're like, Melinda, Grandma lives in the middle of nowhere. It's 102 degrees outside. There's no little kids. It's not going to happen. And I was adamant. Well, after these sightings, I saw that it was not little kids at the bedroom window. It was gray aliens, and that I had an abduction, and that they'd knocked out the the person staying and babysitting me, and that experience, they took a scoop mark out of my leg, and it gave me a little scar that I have to this day. I have that little scoop mark. I have other scoop marks too, but that's just one example, and I have evidence of it. And there you go. And jumping ahead, in late '89, when I was starting to place this together, I go to bed one night after having a discussion with a roommate of mine, that same roommate after this experience over the next year, excuse me, lived with us for about a year, continued. I had two roommates. One of them was out of town at the time. But my roommate Gail, who was there, anyway, so we have this late night discussion. She's going through a separation with her husband, wanted to talk to me about. And I went to bed and was kind of emotional. So I thought I want to do a quick kind of protection meditation before going to bed to fall asleep. And I was an office manager at the time. I managed an office in, corporate Orange County, California. Okay. And I had my alarm set next to me. I had the light on. I just set the alarm. I knew, we talked later than we wanted to. I knew if I fell asleep right away, I was going to get 6 hours of sleep. Not enough really, but we talked much later than we wanted. And so it was like kicking myself, but okay. So I set the alarm. I sat on my bed. I did a quick little visualization meditation I had done 1,000 times. I reached to turn out the light. I kind of slid under the cover somewhere, reached to turn out the light, looked back at the alarm, again, double checking the alarm. And it was 2.5 hours later. And there's no way I was sitting on my bed for 2.5 hours. And I couldn't get this image out of my head of 3 gray aliens standing next to the bed. I jokingly to this day call Manny, Mo, and Jack. Remember the Pep Boys ads, Pep Boys car repair. Have you ever heard of that? Anyways, but I call Manny, Mo, and Jack. Okay, because one was taller, one was a little short, and one was a little short. And one of them, the taller one, was standing in the middle, and he's holding a device. And it kind of, a device in his hands. And I said, and I thought, this is nuts. Whatever, you got to get to sleep right away. You can't even think about this right now. So I turned off the light, crawled under the covers, fell asleep. When my alarm goes off, it's like less than 4 hours later, waking the dead, and and I crawl into work, get through the day. I come home, and Gail, my roommate, were both cooking dinner in the kitchen. She said, "What happened to you last night?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, after we went to bed," she said she couldn't sleep. So she kept hearing, we lived in a 2-story townhouse in Tustin, California, and she kept going downstairs.
Okay.
Check on noise. She kept coming up and saw, I had a big gap under my door at the time. At one time, there must have been very plush carpeting. At this time, it was like Berber, so a big gap. And she saw my light on in my room. So she knocks on my door. No answer. Knocks on my door. No answer. Pounds on my door. No answer. And now she's afraid something's happened to me. It's like 3 a.m. She's pounding on my door. I already, bitched before going to bed that I had to get to sleep right away. And she goes in my room. I'm not there. Okay. So she witnesses I'm gone during my missing time. Then she goes back in her room. And at first she only told me that part of the story. Then we have dinner or whatever that night. And eventually she says, and she thought I was agitated, so she didn't say more. And then she said, you look like you've calmed down. There's more. And I go, what do you mean more? She said, after I went in your room and went back into my room, sat on my bed reading, she said, I also went downstairs. You weren't anywhere downstairs. I went outside. You weren't outside. Your car was right outside the front door, parked in a carport. So she knew I hadn't gone anywhere. And she goes, I'm sitting in my room. And she said, there was she left the door to the hallway open, hoping that she was going to hear me come in the front door downstairs and come
Sure.
home any moment. And she's all ready to say, "Where have you been? What's going on?" And she said, "Melinda, there was a flash of light in the hallway. She looks expecting to see me, like maybe I'd flip the switch really quick or something. And stepping out, she's fully conscious, sitting on her bed, stepping out of the hallway into her room is a gray alien." And she later painted a picture of it. And I ran into her years later and she showed me the picture, which I didn't know until then that she had painted. But she said it looked right at her. It turned. After going in my room, she had closed the door. She said it went through your closed door, not like a knife through butter, as if there wasn't a door there. And so here she went in my room during my missing time and saw an alien fully conscious in the hallway.
Gosh.
She had a 14-year-old daughter. She's going through separation with her husband, going towards divorce. The 14-year-old daughter, who normally would with dad, came to stay with her for about 3 or 4 months with us. When the 14-year-old was there, the 14-year-old eventually left. And I was told she misses her dad, misses her friends in school. So she was there for like
Sure.
3 months. She needs to get back to her studies.
Yeah.
Well, years later, when I ran into Gail, she said Angie was her daughter. She goes, "Why do you think Angie left?" And I said, "Well, she missed her dad and wanted to get back to school." And she said, "No, that's the story we gave you." Angie was so freaked out by witnessing what was happening to me regularly, the 14-year-old, including a military abduction. And they said they were awoken during the night by military men shouting orders at me and me crying and pleading with them, "No, no, no." You know.
Before we go further into that aspect of the story, to the best of your knowledge, did Gail have any pre-existing interest in the subject or any knowledge of it or any involvement or?
No, I would say a metaphysical, spiritual interest, maybe, but other than that, no. And Angie, being only 14, had no clue. You know,
Sure.
although Angie was very, very bright, very exceptional student, and ended up at like age 15 starting her own business that was successful. You know, so, but Angie moved out because both my ET and military experiences were scaring them so much. And Gail didn't tell me that till years later. Not at that time. That's not why we thought she left. You know,
this is as good an example, multiply witnessed, of a being taken event as any. Again, the partial memories, the fact that your roommate searched for you and you were not there.
Yeah.
You were nowhere to be found. You didn't go driving off in some trance. Your car was there. You're in a townhouse. It's the middle of the night.
That's right.
And she also sees a being in the hallway, which had to be one of the great shocks of her life, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she just said, "What is that?" And she was fully awake and conscious. And she was, bless her, she was instantly concerned for me, like, what's
Sure.
happening to Melinda? Luckily for me at that time, you asked about her previous interest. I will tell you this. Because this was in late 89. She had read just a couple of years prior, Communion by Whitley Strieber, which had made the New York Times, bestseller
Sure.
list. And she had read that. And so she ended up asking me the next day after she told me about it. She goes, "Are you familiar with this book by this guy, and she tried to remember the name and stuff, but I knew. Now at that point, I had not read it. I was familiar with it, but had not read it. I actually had someone, I worked in a bookstore that had it briefly, and I had someone try to give it to me. And I actually refused it because I just thought it was the dumbest thing ever. Now I realized it was the image on the cover and that what the book was about. I had picked it up in the bookstore, looked at it. It so freaked me out that even though I had someone try to give me it, I refused it. Of course, now I own it and have read it. But back then,
Of course.
but and I'm very good friends with Whitley. I've even told him this story, but we're very, very good friends. So at that time, though, she said, "Are you having experiences like that guy who wrote that book?" I said, "I don't know." She goes, "Melinda, I'm here to tell you, you're having experiences like the guy that wrote that book."
Wow.
Yeah. And I've had other witnessed experiences, Peter. I guess blessed is a weird way to put it, but I'm blessed that I've had other
It's
witnesses.
nice to know
Yeah.
you're not losing your mind and that they're verified by independent human beings
Well,
with no angle or axe to
I
grind.
always say evidence is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. You know, it's like, yay, I have evidence. I have proof that this is happening to me. On the other hand, it's like, damn it, this is happening to me. And
You know,
that's compounded with the MILAB events, the covert human involvement events.
to just add a thought there, that is an unforgettable moment in my life where this memory returns after more than 14 years out of nowhere and comes roaring back into my
Hmm.
life, literally like a freight train in my head, a
Hmm.
tape loop that won't stop, thinking, I have to be going crazy. There must be something wrong with me mentally, because how could anybody forget what was the most profoundly unforgettable moment of their life? Again, for me, it was a sighting, but a very dramatic one. And I really had to calm myself down, pull myself together, and think through what I was going to do next. And ultimately, of course, the answer was right there. My sister Helen lived only a mile or so north of me. I was in New York's Chinatown. She was in the East Village. But before I called her, I realized the one thing I shouldn't do is just say, I just remembered this thing from childhood and blurt it out,
Yes.
because then I wouldn't really know. She'd say yes or no, and I wouldn't really know. So I set the scene, and she cut me off mid-sentence and said, "Stop, I know what you're talking about."
Yes. Yes.
Then confirmed everything that I consciously remembered. And with one exception, she wasn't sure it was 5 or 6 objects, which we worked out really quickly the next day, because when we got off the phone, I did my first UFO related painting, painted 6. But when she came over, when I showed it to her, I had my hand over one of them and took it away. And both of us agreed it had to be a odd number because it was a V shape. Anyway, in that moment, and I will never forget it, that split screen reality of, oh my God, it's real. Oh my God,
Yeah. That's
it's
right.
real. And
That's right.
you and I have
That's right.
both documented that. Of
Yes.
whew. Anyway,
Exactly.
we have a bunch of images, and I don't know if you want to start showing them right now, but do you want to give us some background on how you began to come aware of and began to study this separate parallel phenomena of, if I
Sure.
understand it correctly, the American military, or obviously a very
Well,
classified
it's
branch?
worldwide. It's worldwide. I can tell you that from my research. A little while
So it's
later,
not just the American military, it's other militaries involved?
well, it's a worldwide phenomenon. I have it in other countries. S- Sometimes the person having the experience is aware that it's definitely English speaking covert, covert humans. Um, in some cases, there are some other languages. So it seems to be working with some other agencies that may be international in some cases. But it also seems from the people having these experiences, because you guys, I've done this research into the covert human involvement with abductions for 30 years. I've been in the field for 32, but it's really 30 years that I've been doing this research.
Hmm.
And I've had many, many cases. I've worked with most of, if not, I could pretty much say all the major abduction researchers, name a big name, and I've worked with them in their cases, and their cases have come to me, and I've sat down and interviewed them, that they have cases in this. That's well known. And I've worked closely in it. I'm not a therapist, and I don't do regressive hypnosis. When I say I work with a case, I interview them
Yeah.
extensively. So I've probably interviewed easily 200 people extensively, 100 of those extremely extensively,
Hmm.
you know, and then gathered their evidence. I apologize to anyone out there that's tried to contact me or talk to me about their experiences. But I tend now to only, I mean, I'll talk to anyone, but I only focus and do extensive interviews on the people with evidence. I have so many amazing cases
Yes.
with evidence that's where I'm spending my time and energy, because that's what I can present to the rest of
Yeah.
ufology and out there to the world to say, yes, this is happening, so um, but so that's kind of my focus of it. And then, of course, those cases are advanced cases often. So I have the double whammy there of not only do they have evidence, but they're a very advanced case that usually has multiple experiences and a lot of memory of their experiences a lot of the times, etc. Um, Although I'll help anyone try to figure out what's going on with them. But again, I admit that's where I spend the time and energy. But anyways, I'm sorry. You had a question and I probably got sidetracked.
Well, just how did you begin to become aware of the whole military intelligence mimicking, if you will, of the abduction experience, as opposed to, I would imagine, your first area of interest when your life started to change around this subject
Sure.
of those events initiated and involving truly other intelligences and
Sure. Well, Peter,
often, the
I
ubiquitous
have an
grays.
exact, I do have an exact answer to that. Even though apparently throughout 90, 91, 92, I was having military experiences, I didn't know it yet. And my roommate wasn't until years later that she shared with me that she witnessed those experiences. And
Hmm.
Angie, her daughter, moving out, etc. So it was in 1993, and it started with what I call the harassment surveillance stuff, phone monitoring stuff, interrupted phone calls, odd electrical sounds on the phone that just, where you can tell like someone else came on the line. And then I
Hmm.
was having helicopter, the infamous black helicopter harassment, and etc. But then in August of 1993, I had a military abduction where I was abducted from where I live by the military, and also November of 93. So those experiences in August and November of 93 really cemented it. And right leading up to those, during those, and after those, a lot of harassment, surveillance, monitoring kind of stuff going on.
Melinda, did you come out of those initial two experiences with conscious memories immediately or memories that followed? Did you have a sense that, they, like them,
Yes.
have the power to cloud our minds, to create screen memories, or were these memories fairly immediate?
I had fairly immediate conscious memory, and then worked with the late Dr. Deborah Troncalli, uh, as well as others, therapists, and long story short, to recall memory and additional memory. One of those experiences, I ended up having, no joke, 12 or 13 regressions over one of them
Hmm.
because it was so detailed and there was more, and I wanted to get to it and learn the rest of it.
Hmm.
Um, so it started with some, conscious memory. Let me see if I always they're so close together. Sometimes just when I'm telling about them like this, I confuse the two. So let me think of the
Mm-hmm.
August experience was a medical one. Um, I now know because of a medical doctor that interviewed me, long story short, a surgeon, um, that it seems that I may have had. Now I've had 3 hybrid presentations in my ET experiences,
Hmm.
and saw one of those children again. And I should always preface those by saying that I remember. There may be more, but I have 3 because that's a very common thing in abductions. I have
Yeah,
3 that I remember, and then one
with
of those
women.
I had again as an adult, presented the same daughter again 20 years later as an adult. And and got to see her again. And because of somehow that I reacted the first time I was shown her, I got to apologize the other time. And it was very emotional. Yvonne, I had major missing time. I had physical evidence on my body. I had new scars and a scoop mark that appeared after that event. And Yvonne Smith did the regressive hypnosis for me of that event.
Sure.
And you can even ask her, I was extremely emotional in the recall, getting to apologize 20 years later to a hybrid child I had a negative reaction to in a previous experience was extremely, emotional, let's just say. Okay, so on the side, though, that's why the only reason I brought that up is to say, going back to that August 93 military experience, I now have reason to believe I may have had a hybrid fetus that was not formed, or my pregnancy was not taking, something was wrong, and that the military in that case were doing basically an abortion on me to remove the malformed hybrid fetus. And I was in a hazmat clean room environment. I was taken from where I live in Corona del Mar, California at the time, a little beachside community. I was renting an apartment there. I was removed from that apartment, drugged, taken from there, taken to an underground base, and had the hazmat clean room environment. They did this very sterile environment to do basically an abortion procedure on me. A surgeon who interviewed me years later said the procedure I described, because I don't know medical procedures, he said it's an early term abortion when there's a problem pregnancy, a very problem pregnancy with it maybe forming into the wall of the uterus kind of thing. Anyway, so long story short, he said it sounds like that's what they were doing, is removing that. And then the end of that experience. Now, some of these experiences, now you say they're mimicking. I'm going to correct you a little bit there, if I may.
Please.
Because there's experiences that I call, okay, first off, you can have alien abductions that are completely alien. There's that. Okay. Then you can have military experiences that are completely military. Okay. But in my case, I don't look into all mind control and super soldier and other things considered to be military experiences, only to understand where the borders are. And, and some people are crossovers into these other areas, so that can get confusing. But the emphasis of my research, even more so over the years, has been specifically people who are alien abductees like myself, who then get targeted by these covert human agencies. And it's because they're data mining us, Peter. That's how I always like to describe it. They're getting data on answers they need about, which gets into why it's happening and and what they're looking for. I'll get into that in a minute, but they're data mining us. So in that case, they wanted that DNA. They wanted that hybrid DNA, that ET DNA, obviously probably. And at the end of the experience, I was going to start to explain this. A lot of these experiences involve covert humans. As wild as this sounds, everybody, I have hundreds of people with this, or over 100 anyways, that have this. Covert humans and ETs working together. And in the end of that experience, I had what I call a handoff. You can be taken by ETs from your environment, home, trip, car, whatever it is you're being abducted from, hotel, whatever, you can be taken by ETs and handed over to covert humans. You can be taken by covert humans, handed over to ETs. You can have a predominantly human experience that just happens to have some ETs present, or you can have a predominantly ET experience that just happens to have some covert humans present. And so
let me ask you to hold that thought
and in this case, it was predominantly human, real quick, I'll just finish. Predominantly human experience, but at the very end of it, they handed me over to ETs. Even though the humans cleaned me up after the medical surgical procedure, the ETs cleaned me up even more. And I believe in that case, the ETs might have brought me home.
A couple of thoughts here before we go on, and we're coming into our first break. First, I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you do.
Thank you.
You are hyper
Thank you.
articulate in the specifics that you're relating to us. And for anybody unfamiliar with the abduction phenomena or just sees it, it's been enough of a struggle to wrap your head around even the possibility of so-called alien abduction that this is completely off the rails. Well,
That's
it's
right.
not. And it's going to be, I'm going to ask you to pick up where we are leaving off now in the second half of the show.
Sure.
This one last thought again is what you just said about removing that hybrid fetus. That sounds to some people like the wildest science fiction possible, but what you say makes perfect sense to me from my decades of study, and it just is so logical. But at the same time, for somebody who is not familiar with the whole subject, the literature, the reality,
That's right.
it's so crazy sounding that it essentially is its own cover story. Well, of course, that's madness. Even
That's right.
the possibility that other intelligence abduct people. Now you're really taking. No, this
Well,
is part of it, folks.
that's right. And I can help
And
people wrap their head around it, Peter, by
yeah,
explaining it like this.
and
If
this
alien abductions, I've said this for 30 years, of doing this research. If alien abductions are real, of course they are. You worked with Bud, John Mack, the evidence is overwhelming, there, et cetera, et cetera.
and
If
literally, I
alien,
have to ask you to hold that sentence
okay,
because we're going to go to break.
when we come back, I will finish that sentence. There we go.
I know you
And
will.
we can get into pictures.
This is Peter Robbins with my guest, Melinda Leslie. You're watching or listening to Meanwhile Here on Earth. Back in a few minutes.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires with Sound the Alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected. Only at kgradb.com.
And we're back. Peter Robbins with my special guest, Melinda Leslie, on this episode of Meanwhile Here on Earth. Before we return to that sentence that I cut Melinda off on, as you heard in that last cutaway on the commercial, the archive at KGRA is indeed massive. I have no idea how many shows there are, but hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, who knows? As many stars as in the cosmos. A tremendous amount of really interesting content. You can subscribe by the month or by the year. You can, as I recall, do a 3-day complimentary trial subscription. But if you subscribe and you use my name, Peter, Peter, as your subscription code, you receive a full 30% discount off of your subscription. So please consider that. And now back to Melinda. Second part of that sentence, Melinda, that I cut you off on.
And I was just drinking, that's Pellegrino water I'm drinking, for anyone that thinks, oh, she's hoisting a bottle of wine or a big bottle of beer. I wish. No. It's a bottle of Pellegrino. Okay, I had it. I'm in my office doing this because the internet's, even though it can sometimes lag, it's much better here than at home. So as I left home, I thought I need water. I grabbed that out of the fridge. So I'm glad I have it. I've been guzzling it. Okay, so here we go. Part 2 of that sentence. Trying to remember exactly what I was saying, but I was saying basically, let me see if I can get to this. It also gets into why, not only why this is happening, but what I think they're after as far as the covert guys. So do you remember the first part of the sentence? What exactly I was saying?
Just that the gist of it was.
Remember, Peter? Exactly.
Just it was not exactly, but the basics of it were that they were data mining the experiences that individuals have had in terms of working with women, to be able to actually get the DNA from.
Well, not just women; it's men too. I mean, I have a lot of male cases. It's
but
really
in terms
equal.
of the hybrid being. Okay. Physicality.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So that gets into what they're wanting. You can bring up, I gave you images numbered. Yes. I think number 1.
Yep.
Okay, which gets into why is this happening? So I think this is a really good point to get into that.
Yeah.
In my 30 years of research and in interviewing the experiencers, the witnesses, I keep coming up with programs repeatedly, and what they're questioned and asked by those perpetrating these covert experiences. So what they're interrogated about, if they have an interrogation there. So first, just so everyone knows, there's interrogations and questioning. There's follow-up medical procedures like I had. I was interrogated in my November of 93 experience. And by the way, I think right now, I want everyone to understand, to the best of my knowledge, I've had 9 of these military abductions.
Mm-hmm.
I have worked with cases that have had a lot more and cases that have had less. I always say there's like a curve. In a moment, we'll get into that slide, and I'll show you this curve of understanding, and my experiences are somewhere right in the middle of that curve. But I've worked with cases that are much more advanced cases than me, and I've worked with people who have just had the basics in the beginning. So but here's what, in an interrogation scene, this is what the covert folks seem to want to know. They want to know ET motives and agenda. Okay, that makes perfect logical sense.
Sure.
That they really want to know what. So when you say data mining, or I said data mining, what I mean is they're using us as an intelligence resource and looking for certain data to answers they have, unanswered questions, or information they're needing. A lot of it is also regarding the technology. I'll get to that in just a minute. But these things come up consistently. And the number one thing people get, so I kind of have these actually in order to the frequency they come up, is ET motives and agenda. The abductee gets questioned about that. They get asked about that. It seems like these covert people really are trying to understand what are the motives and agenda of the ETs, or as experiencers, abductees, contactees, what do we know?
Mhm.
Do we have a sense of what that is? Have the ET told us? Have we figured something out from our experiences? So it's what we know, and maybe directly if we received information from the ETs. Then the
Yeah.
next one is ET and abductee genetics. Again, see, with my experience, that first one there was a genetic one. And by the way,
Yeah.
according to Gail and her daughter, I had other military experiences before that. Peter, I still don't remember those. All I have are these two roommates saying we witnessed these things
Mm.
happen to you, but I have no memory of those other than when they told me what they witnessed. Maybe it spurred a little bit of memory
Yeah.
of guys in my room or something, but I would need regressions over those because I do not remember. I'm blocked. They said I was pleading, crying, and obviously very fearful. I'm thinking
Mm.
that suppression. And by the way, that's worth stating right now. Even with the ET abductions, I believe a lot of the memory suppression is from the experience or the abductee themselves. You compartmentalize this. This is true in other kinds. I'm not a therapist, but from knowing people that are and hearing them explain this to me, my understanding is it's well understood in psychotherapy that people wall off traumatic events. They can bury and repress the memory of trauma,
Yeah.
and because you have to get on with life. So how do you deal with
Yes.
it so it doesn't constantly affect you? Is, well, you kind of basically don't deal with it, or you compartmentalize it, you
Yeah.
separate it out. Otherwise it would people's I do know abductees whose lives have been so highly impacted by their extraterrestrial experiences. I almost said the A word,
Yeah.
aliens. I try not to, extraterrestrial
Yeah.
experiences. Um, and and those that have had the covert experiences, that it really has almost destroyed their lives.
I
But
know.
a lot of people move on, and so those abductees,
Yes.
those contactees who are able to integrate it, or if they've had trauma, are able to get on with their life and push it away, push it back. I understand that's a natural coping mechanism. It may even be a healing mechanism. So
Mm.
and then of course the ETs are known to repress memory. I think there's a lot
Mhm.
of evidence in the experiences to suggest that that also happens.
No
Um,
question for
when they
me.
do the mind stare, they stare in someone's eyes, cause them to affect. They calm you down and do stuff by wiping your forehead. So these things are common in the experiences.
Yeah.
But in the covert experiences, there's the use of fear, drugs, hypnosis, intimidation, and good old fashioned mind control practices. I'll
Yeah.
get to that in just a second. So going back to ET and abductee genetics, have you been affected or changed genetically? Do you have hybrids? Are you a hybrid? Those kind of things. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the third one, ET and abductee psi abilities. That's the paranormal abilities. They're wanting to master that. Do you remote view? Do you do psychokinesis, affect matter with your mind? Do you do telepathy? Et cetera, et cetera. So they're and they're looking for super performers. Some people get recruited into these covert groups if they're super performers in these areas.
Mm.
I do know a few, and there's some well-known stories. And people who talk about that part of their experience. Of course, the fourth is the development and practice of mind control, as I was just saying. So not only are they using you and doing mind control on you to repress your memory of the experience, but they're often using what they practice on you to maybe develop it further. We're kind of become lab rats in the experience, unfortunately. But okay, and then
Yes.
the last, but maybe the most important, is the mental interface and psi operation of ET technology. Well, I would say everything regarding the technology. So for instance, they're in they're interrogating you. Have you flown or navigated a ship? If you have flown, navigated a ship, or worked any controls on board an ET craft, how did you do it? Okay.
Mm.
Grant Cameron is often talking about, and he's actually writing a book about people flying ships. That's exactly what the covert guys are interested in. There's a mental interface, a side component to operating the technology. It's paranormal in nature, if you will, psychic in nature, or consciousness is probably a better
Yeah.
way to put it. Consciousness, control the technology. And then also, have you seen or any technology? Have you been shown uh, mathematical formulas? Math. languages, ET languages, math, symbols. What do you know? What have you been shown? What have you been taught? So when I say the technology component, that's actually, I should create a slide that takes that last component there. In fact, I will for future presentations. I just had this idea, but because I'm always having to explain it. And I thought when I do future presentations, after that, I'll have a slide that says under the technology, here's the subcategories of technology, whether they're asking if you've flown, navigate, or operate a ship, whether they've asked you about the side component, whether they've asked you, have you sat at a computer, whether they've asked you about mathematical formulas, like I said, languages, procedural things, weapons, that kind of stuff, propulsion systems, those kind of things. So abductees get questioned and asked about those. And if they think you have experience with that or knowledge of it, you become unfortunately kind of a frequent flyer, if you will, amongst the covert experiences, which gets to the next slide. So show me the next slide with the curved line, shipping
you
number
got
2.
it.
There, I'm so glad this is working well. This wasn't going to be like a lecture, you guys, but he said,
no,
do you
this
have
is
images?
Actually very, very appreciated, Melinda. It's such an overlapping series of tightly interwoven subjects that these graphs are very welcome to help us pull back a bit and go.
Sorry, I just remembered like the end of the question, which is the end of what I was saying before, which is that exactly as you just said. This is happening because I said before the break, if alien abductions are real, then of course this would be happening. The covert guys managing this subject, those reverse engineering the technology, they have unanswered questions. Okay. And they have stuff I'm not saying those involved with this know everything. I think the MILAB cases, which is MIL for military, AB for abduction. I hate the term. I'm trying to get away from it, but I realize people understand it. It's used for a long time now in the community. I'm trying to get into just calling it covert human involvement. Even like CHIC, which would be chick, covert human involvement in contact, or covert human involvement in extraterrestrial experiences. So that's what cheetah or something. Anyways, we'll come up with a name. But I'm trying to get away from that overuse of a military term because it's so much broader than just the military. It gets into covert human agencies, even private industry and whatnot. So in these experiences, but it's because they're lacking pieces of information. Yes, in some cases are they working with the ETs, but you guys, that may mean there is more than one type of ET and they're not working with all of them, or they have a very limited agreement and there's still stuff they don't know about the technology. See, as contactees and abductees, we've had hands-on with the technology. We've had that human capability of operating, interfacing, understanding. So it may be we have abilities, those psi abilities and everything that they're needing, that they're trying to train the individuals who fly these craft or build these craft. Maybe they need these abilities to be able to do that. And maybe we become, as I said, data mining. We become another intelligence source to get to that information because of the depth of our interaction. If they want to learn about the ETs beyond what the ETs are telling them themselves, and what if in that environment they don't completely trust the information they're getting? Well, then again, they would maybe be trying to appeal to our, not only our knowledge, but our sense of patriotism and whatever to help. I mean, some abductees feel like they're helping these people understand this. Now, unfortunately, they're so abusive in the process that most abductees with these experiences feel extremely abused. Obviously, it's illegal, immoral, completely unconstitutional, of course. Okay, so this line here, I call the program development curve. People can see on here, and I have abductions on there in red because the ET abductions are not the beginning necessarily of the process. You can have, there's contact through history, and then it gets into genealogical ET contact. It's well known, you know this from working with Bud, etc., that abductions run in families. There's a
Yes.
genealogical component.
Yes.
It's very common for abductees to learn it happened to their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, etc. I mean, I remember the first time I heard of a case that went back 4 generations and a case that went back 5 generations. 5
Mhm.
generations of understanding someone like an abductee going, okay, this happens to me, my parents, my grandparents. Now I have kids and grandkids.
Yes.
You have 5 generations. That's extremely common in the experience now. I can get into, like Debbie Jordan, Debbie Cobble. She has that, goes boom, 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 boom. There's 5
Oh,
generations,
yeah.
So it's extremely common now. And I remember when I first was shocked by that, and now it's common, I mean, there may be even 6 generations. I won't be surprised when I hear it, and so that goes on. And then you can have sightings and psychic contact before you have hello, that's understood, that you can have that before you have abduction. And then from there, then comes the covert involvement of like threats and warnings, phone calls, surveillance, harassment. You can see the lines go up here. I'm going to start skipping them just to save time. You can go into seeing aliens with the military. You can have the traditional MIB kind of experiences. Those get into the harassment, threats and warning stuff. You can be re-abducted for medical purposes, like I shared about my own experience. I have many cases like that. You can be used in as an ET liaison. There's many cases of people being used in a communication role with the ETs. If you're able to and very comfortable communicating with the ETs, the covert guys might put you in a situation to do that. Some people actually get recruited into those kind of programs. The book Above Black gets into that. He is an alien abductee, and he's get put in a role and he wrote about it. I know you know who I'm talking about. I'm forgetting his name right now. It'll come to me. I'm just pulling a blank. But he wrote a book about it in his book Above Black, about being used in an ET communication role. I'll think of his name in a second. Probably people out there watching this who know are yelling at friends of mine are probably yelling at this computer right now. Okay. Yeah, it'll come to me, guys. Hang on. Okay. And then you can be recruited into basically military space travel stuff, what we call as a secret space program kind of stuff. Being used, like I said, side jobs recruitment for your psi abilities, ET communicator, like I said. You can become a perpetrator of these experiences. I have a couple cases of guys who then became involved found themselves being involved in picking up another abductee. Now, I know of 1 or 2 cases where the people did this willingly, okay? And then I know some people that it was against their will, under mind control or duress, and hated that they were involved in perpetrating this, on someone else. And then it can repeat. So everyone can see that line. Then it can repeat anywhere along that line. Now, my experiences stop in about the mid-range. I've seen aliens with the military. I've been medical research, interrogation, life manipulation, et cetera, et cetera. So I've had a bunch of those, but that's where I stop. But I have cases that go all the way up that line. And then I, of course, have cases of people who have less stuff than me.
If I can jump in, ask 2 questions.
Sure.
For some people, myself included to a degree, I can follow along. I can accept basic possibilities or actualities. And other ones, they challenge me at a higher level. The idea of I'm making an agreement in a previous life that I will do such and such.
Well, I'm not talking about past life agreement here. I'm talking about in these experiences. So I'm not getting into past life agreement here. Yeah, that's a whole nother subject. And that would be a whole nother discussion. I think with the ET experiences that exist, and maybe even with covert ones, I mean, everything, if you have an understanding of energy and spirituality, everything is karma. So you can say everything is connected and everything has a connection to some past lives, in some cases, but that would be a whole nother philosophical discussion. But in this case, when I say they've agreed, I meant in the experiences they agreed, or under duress, under extreme mind control, they were used. Yeah.
Got
So
it.
in
Okay.
some cases, some guys were like, "Yeah, I want to be a part of it. I'll learn." And in other cases, they were like, "I hate that I'm part of this." I even had one guy whose family had a connection to a congressman and used that connection through his family. I don't know if it was a family member or just a close friend of the family's, but there was a close connection. And he used that connection to get himself out of the program. And he won't talk about it or go public because he's afraid, scared to death that if he mentions anything, they'll take that as it's an
Sure.
okay to use him again. And he doesn't want to be used. He got very abusive. And so he worked to get out of the program.
Well, number one, thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Number two, before I ask you my question, one of the things you said before talking about the generational aspect of this, and going back to the origins of abduction research, really in the later 70s, because Bud was certainly a pioneer of this, and his publication of his book, Missing Time, in 1981 was a real game changer in the world of UFO studies and the beginning of an appreciation of, as David Jacobs once said, we were focused on the cars and not the drivers,
Yes.
which kind of says it. Um, the the original thought was, if something like this happened to you,
Yes.
it would be as rare as getting hit by lightning. And surely, if it happened to you, it was never going to happen again. Of course, what we now know, whether we like it or not, and this is not from guesswork or mystical thinking or um, anything other than studies of now
That's
hundreds
right.
and hundreds and hundreds of individuals and
Tens
their
of thousands of
families,
cases.
is that
Yeah.
these things run along at least one familial line. And more than, well, it was close to 40 years ago that I first met Deb White Cabell
Yeah.
when she came to New York to work with Bud. He had already visited her and her family. And I remember seeing that particular scar on her leg. And then not long after, seeing essentially the same scar in about the same location on her mother's leg.
Yes.
Also, in that period of time when I was working for Bud, there were times that I was either responding to the initial mail or doing an intake interview in person or over the phone. And I remember one
Yes.
particularly poignant one with a young woman whose mother and grandmother were in the room with her. And just the three of them, terribly concerned. We all have had these experiences. Is there anybody else you've ever heard of that's had such a thing happen within their family? And
Sure.
by that time, we did have that data and had dealt
Yes.
with a number of cases of three generations at that point, and just said yes, and heard her yell back to her mom and grandmother, very excitedly and in a positive, it does happen. It is real. And just a very poignant personal memory attached to what you were saying. The other
Yes.
thing is, and it's an area where there is, I accept grounds for basic possibilities here based on that factor of where we are technologically at the
Yes.
highest levels of secured black projects and things based on where we say we are.
Yes.
And then there's what I consider outrageous abuses, citing the so-called secret space program
Yes.
and projects and stories and narratives that I think are off the bullshit chart.
Yeah.
For you, I mean, again, this is one of those areas of study where we can't say, well, here's a photo of this asteroid in this belt of Saturn, where this particular group of, Nazis settled in and are having,
Yeah.
it's a base for, where they service the
Hmm.
base under the Antarctic, etc. It's an area of study where uh, once again, it can be very difficult to wrap one's head around the basic possibilities, not even talking about the said claims of other individuals. For you, as a
Yes.
serious researcher in this area, can you give us an example of what you consider is a very real aspect based on interfacing with an individual, somebody who came to you or who you've worked with one way or the other, who you feel is credible, who has been involved in some aspect of the so-called secret space program, and what their involvement was, some idea of that, capsulized story for us.
Well, I'm going to proceed with great caution in that I almost, and some people can cite fault in this. I shy away from those cases and those stories. I'm not saying there isn't legitimacy to some of it. I'm so focused on alien abductees who get targeted for those reasons that I said
Got it.
further
Yeah.
because of them wanting information. You don't okay, I can say this: you don't need to even necessarily get into that to say a secret space program of the likes, like for instance Richard Dolan talks about, that there is a development of advanced technology and there's a reverse engineering program. So that secret space program, now whether there's off-planet bases or whatever, you're right, it gets pretty far out there. I do know some people that make those claims that I like them and they're credible people. Okay. Do I know that that really happened to them? No. Okay. I stick, and we'll get into some evidence pictures in a minute. I stick to the evidence for this. So I
Yes.
deal with what I have evidence for, what I have multiple cases of, things that match up. I'm not saying to anyone out there who's had that other kind of experience, I'm not saying that's not happening. I'm just saying it's not my focus of research. Okay. So,
Got it.
so
And shall we
yeah,
go on to image number 3?
sure. There might be a little bit of background stuff here. Okay, this is, I was stopped with two friends on a mountain highway in 1990s. So this is part of my discovering I'm having experiences. This was an alien abduction, and an
Hmm.
artist friend of mine drew that for me. We were on a on a road trip going on a mountain highway. The craft was um, parked on the road. Basically, it was bigger than that. I'll say wedding cake, like layered. I don't want to go into detail about that, but that's just a picture I have of one of my early
Yeah.
experiences that an artist did. And you can go to the next one, next drawing.
Okay. And
And that's just the same artist drawing that experience. My friend
mhm.
Stephen Mike and I stopped. Now, in this case, I have had, again, to say it's a blessing or not is that double-edged sword. But I've been taken with other people a number of times in what are called group or mass abductions. I was part of the
Yeah.
Hotel del Coronado experience, with at least 15 of us taken from the Hotel del Coronado in San Diego, California. It's a case investigated by both Preston Dennett and Yvonne Smith, and extensively by Yvonne. She wrote a book called Coronado about it, and each case has a different chapter. I'm one of the chapters in her book. But
Mhm.
my research or experiences have now been, oh my God, Peter, my research and experiences have now, I'm losing track, are in at least 30 books. Now,
Gosh.
people ask me and say, "Oh, can I quote you? Can I use you this, that?" Or there's
Sure.
3 books that I actually wrote chapters for. I've not written my own book yet, but once I've written chapters for. But anyways, this experience is just, again, Stephen, Mike, and I. That time we were taken from the car. We had missing time, all sorts of
Hmm.
physical evidence, and they went to take sperm from Mike and figured out he had had a vasectomy. And the ETs were questioning him about that, and they took ovum from me and Steve. They were doing something else with. Anyways, that's that experience. Next picture.
Yep. And that is,
And this is, oh, since I mentioned the Coronado event, this is my drawing. You guys, I
yeah.
worked really, really, really hard on this. I'm not an artist, but I worked my ass off on making this drawing for Yvonne to use in her book. And that's my drawing
Wow.
of that mass abduction that happened. And there's short grays, there's elder grays, the one staying next to me on the
Uh-huh.
bottom left hand corner there, the wrinkled forehead and sunken cheeks. And then there's, as you can see, mantis beings there, mantids. I drew 2 of them in there.
Yeah.
And all the people in that experience remember seeing both types of grays and the mantids. That's all very common. Well, not I shouldn't say that. Some people in their regressions got to the beings in their hotel room, maybe going on board craft. That's about it. Those that remember being on board craft, a little more detail
Hmm.
on board a ship, they recall these. So I'm amongst those. And I recognized a gentleman there that this happened in 1994. I think it's March, if I remember correctly, of 94 is when this abduction happened. We were all at a conference together at the Hotel del Coronado when this happened. And John, a gentleman that I met years later in Yvonne's support group, when she eventually regressed me, which was in 2010 or 11 for this experience, I said, and I had not been regressed previously, so that was the first time I got regressed. And I, in the regression, said, I see John there, but how can that be? John didn't join CERO, Yvonne's Close Encounter Resource Organization support group, till later. How can I see him there? And anyway, so, and she said, just keep going, just keep going. And when I was all done with the regression, I said, how could I see John there? And she said, Melinda, John was there. I go, what do you mean John was there? She goes, well, he was there at the event and he was part of the thing. And I said, well, I didn't meet him till years later, like become a friend of his. And then she regressed him. She had regressed him once in 94 over this event. And then she regressed him again after regressing me, not telling him anything about my being there. John in his regression saw me there and reacted the same way, like, how can Melinda be there?
Fascinating.
So both of us saw each other in our regressions.
Yeah.
How cool is that? So the double verification. We didn't meet till like 2008, and she didn't do our regressions until 2010, 2011, where we both saw each other there in an experience that happened back in 94. Isn't that, it just blows my mind. Okay, going on, next picture. Okay, and then this is my drawing. It's really weird, and it's weird to show it publicly, a drawing. We're drawing myself naked. It's kind of embarrassing. But this is me on an elevator in that first 1993 August experience, where I was taken to an underground base and then had the, so go on to the next picture, but that's me on the elevator with a guard. There's more detail, but that's basically. And then this is an artist. This is Bill McDonald, an incredible artist, redrawing that experience for me. I had rough sketches, and that's his drawing of me in the hazmat room when I was going to say, abortion style procedure in a very clean, sterile environment. Yeah, that's that. Okay, next experience, next picture.
There you go.
That's a scoop mark on my leg. That's after an ET abduction, that when I saw my hybrid daughter, again as an adult, and Yvonne regressed me over it, that was the big scoop mark on my leg that I had the next day. That's taken the next morning after the experience.
Now, let's take a moment here for folks that are not familiar with this. If this is kind of a first for you, it's like, ew, that looks like it might have hurt at one point, or it's a little weird or creepy or whatever. Understand.
Very creepy.
These marks appear on people as part of many of these abduction experiences. And one of the hallmarks of them is that they literally self-cauterize. We have no cases that I am aware of where it has a normal healing process with a scab, etc. It's not there one day and it is there, the next morning.
Exactly.
Or
well, you can tell my leg is that's down on my shin. And this experience happened driving home from visiting California, just outside of Phoenix. I had significant missing time of about 3 hours, and knew that I had just missed a bunch of time because a space of road that should have taken an hour and a half took 4.5 hours. So there's no way that and I had a vague memory of getting off the road in the middle of nowhere onto a little highway, like getting off the freeway, off the 10 freeway. And why would I have done that? So I was coming back from California just before getting to Phoenix.
Sure.
And why would I have gotten off in the middle of nowhere? And then when I got regressed about that, yes, I'd gotten off in the middle of nowhere, and I had the classic car was pulled over the side of the road. I mean, ship came down over it, beam of blue light, and I was lifted up in the light as if the roof of the car wasn't there. But after I got presented with the adult hybrid, they put me then, I wasn't yet on an exam table. They put me on exam table, did the scoop. I was very upset at that point because I just had this very emotional, beautiful experience of seeing a hybrid daughter again. And I was like, why are you doing this to me? And they said she needed the DNA. she she needed it. Like, but there's been research to suggest that there are stem cells right under the surface level of skin. And then the late Roger Lear did research to suggest the scoop marks were to encase an implant so your body wouldn't reject it. So it could be they're taking tissue to encase an implant for implanting.
Yes.
And or they're taking stem cells. Well, in this case, I think it's stem cells because they were telling me she needed it. There was a problem. She needed the fresh DNA of mine or whatever. There was some problem, although she looked healthy. And she was actually involved as like a medical assistant in the procedure, which also upset me. And they said, and they literally had to say in the experience, this is her job. Don't you want her to have a job? So they appealed to our sensibilities, like, well, she needs to be employed, right? You know, and it was just really bizarre. But it was very emotional. And yes, there was a little bit of pain in the experience. Now, normally when they do things medically, there isn't, but occasionally there is. And I voiced that was pissing me off in the experience. I go, why are you guys hurting me? You're hurting me. And they're like, oops. And they instantly fixed it. But there was a little pain till I brought it to their attention, and then they fixed it. So then I have the missing time. Like I said, I get home. I drove during the night because it was during August, and I wanted to avoid the 120 degree heat of Phoenix and drive home when it would be a balmy 95 out. And I had the windows down part of the time and the air conditioning running the others. Okay, I get home. It's like 5:30 in the morning. I was supposed to get home by 2. I was very upset because the sun's already coming up. I actually had work later that day. I ended up at one point canceling that, and but when I got up at like 2 in the afternoon, my leg was throbbing, and I go into my kitchen. I had my front door at that apartment opened up into the kitchen. I opened up the front door. I turned on bright fluorescent lighting, so I had plenty of daylight and fluorescent lighting. Put my leg up on the counter. I had leggings on. I pulled them up, and I noticed I had exactly, and then I immediately grabbed my phone, took those pictures that you're seeing with that scoop mark.
Interesting.
And you're right. It was healed overnight. I had shaved my legs the day before leaving.
So you remember particularly?
Yeah. So I had shaved my legs, so that's why they looked freshly shaved. Maybe a little, yeah. I mean, you can tell in the picture, freshly shaved my legs. So you knew that was brand new, because when I shaved my legs, there definitely wasn't a big hole in my leg, and yet there was the next day. So I had the scoop mark and took many pictures of it. Next picture, please. See if I'm going to start speeding through these a little quicker.
Yeah.
Now, this is myself and a friend had one of these covert military abductions taken from her apartment. And a week before, her landlord had put in new, painted the doorways, put in this new black foam weather stripping, and had actually replaced her deadbolt lock. So a week before, this was all new. And now you can see when they broke into the apartment, they apparently tried to get into the regular door lock and the deadbolt lock, 2 separate ones, both locked. And I'm about to show you more, but that's damage to the foam, damage to chips of wood. I mean, all that, the chips of wood around the lock, around the frame of the door, and the foam tear, all that is brand new. Okay. And we took that within 2 days after the experience. Next picture. On the left is a seam that they had put. Now, I wanted to go to the police about this break-in. It happened from my friend's apartment. She did not want to. Well, I can tell you, it's Misha Johnston, who's known in the community, and her self-lecture, so I can go for it. She's been very public about this. We had a friend who's a private investigator look at this, and he said this was a pro. This is the seam of where the door jamb, and the door frame and another part of the frame are glued and nailed and painted together, and they had stuck a crowbar or something in there and had pried the frame loose. How do you get into locks in a deadbolt? Well, apparently if you're a pro, you pry the frame loose, and then with enough force you can push in the door, and they had pried the whole frame loose in this experience. So this is evidence of the break-in, and that was a military abduction. We were both removed from the apartment, and that experience was specifically to scare the crap out of us. It was totally an intimidation experience. Okay, next picture.
Yeah.
This is bruises I received in that same experience on my leg and up on my arm. And I'm holding the arm against a towel because to kind of flatten the arm out for the sake of the picture. So I'm
Yeah.
squeezing it. But you can see those bruises right there. A military guard was guiding me walking down a hallway in an underground base, and he had a death grip on my arm. You can see my hand over here to the side. Wait,
Yeah.
there we go. They're like that. Okay, there we can see like that on my arm. And he said, walk with me. And if he stopped, he wanted me to stop. Well, occasionally he would stop or we'd go to make a turn and I didn't know. So I'd make another step. Well, he would grab me. Now he wasn't trying to hurt me. He was just like, stay with me. But he was holding me so tightly. That's what caused the bruises on my arm. And the bruises on my leg, I did fight back. People often ask, does anyone fight back in these experiences? Yes. I'm going to show you some more pictures of such a thing. But in this case, I fought back. And the guy, a guy interrogating me, anyways, a long story short, hit me on the leg. And I also tripped over a piece of furniture when they were taking me out of the apartment. They
Gosh.
weren't fully carrying me. It's a long story. I don't want to go into too much detail, but they had done this thing to partially immobilize me, but they had my arm like over their shoulder and were walking me out.
Yeah.
Anyways, long story short, I did trip over a glass top coffee table. So some of those bruises are from when the guy was hitting me on the leg, and some of those were from tripping over this coffee table and injuring my leg in the experience. Okay, next picture. And again, these same bruises here too, as well.
Yeah.
The higher bruise, at one point in this experience, oh God, this is just gonna sound so nuts. Like all this doesn't sound nutty, all right. They brought a reptilian in to scare the crap out of us, and I believe that higher bruise came from part of my experience with the reptilian. So it was a threat of being raped and killed. Obviously, neither happened to me in the experience, but this reptilian projected a mental image, and there was some handling. Misha was taken into another room. They brought a reptilian in the room with her and made her think she was witnessing. She had 2 grown kids and grandkids. Made her think she was witnessing that a group of guys had broken in to where her 2 sons were living. One son was living with the other just for a short period, living with the other, and the other one had a grandchild. And that they broke in and were killing her family. The threat was, stop talking about this, or next time this will be real. In my case, it was rape and torn apart, and in her case, it was killed her family. Luckily, nothing happened to her family nor to me. It was all a mental projection by this reptilian to literally intimidate us, and it did for a while. This and some other things that followed this. It's a long story, but to a certain degree, it worked. There's another therapist in the community that says, I think it did a bigger number on you back then than you realize. Even though I kept saying, I'm fine, I'll talk about it. He knew that there was a change, that I think he'd be happy to see me over that now. Okay, next image. Sometimes you get interrogated about propulsion. The late Mark McCandlish, an incredible artist, you're probably familiar with him, did this drawing for me. You couldn't see all this. This was on the craft, but what you saw was a floor and walls and a control panel. But if you stripped all that away or saw like the skeleton of the craft, this was the propulsion system that the ETs showed me. And I've been interrogated about this in my covert experiences. Next picture. People have, this is one of my cases. I have so many pictures of harassment by black helicopters, but this is someone just standing in her yard. So you can tell that that's pretty close. She's looking, there's a tree right next door. But what I find interesting about this picture is there's also a craft in the picture. There's this unknown object that, completely unknown. When you blow it up and look at it, you go, that looks like something else. That's also in the picture is the same time. And this black unmarked helicopter was circling tightly over her property. And by the way, she had an experience the night before. So she had an experience the next morning, boom, helicopter shows up circling. And then there's also this other object in the air. There you go. Next picture. Very common. Again, I have a bunch of pictures, not a bunch, but a couple of pictures of this. This is someone who had a black van parked out their outside their apartment. I've had a couple cases where the people actually got bold enough to approach the car or the person parked. But this is down a long private driveway. It's a couple of houses down this, you can see, next to a lake and a rather private street. And there's this unknown van. The neighbors were complaining, why are we under surveillance? This dark van. And I think there's actually someone in the front passenger seat, if I remember correctly, that is holding a camera. If you were to blow that up, I think there's somebody there taking a picture. But anyway, so that's typical of the harassment and stuff that the experiencers have at the hands of these covert guys. Okay, next picture. So this is great. Okay, this is an amazing case. This gentleman, and the next two pictures will be from him. He is the sheriff of 2 counties in Northern California, like the Bay Area and above. So he is the head, not just a sheriff, he is the head, I don't know, I guess commander or captain of the commander, maybe, of the sheriffs of 2 major counties. He's had extensive alien abduction, extensive military abduction. His brother was visiting him. His brother witnessed his military abduction. And the guy came out of the shower with a towel wrapped around him into the hallway, and there was a guy in camouflage there waiting for him.
Melinda. I do not think this is a military or alien abduction. Occam's razor, we will go for the most grounded, logical, mundane possibility that we are having a technical issue here. And Chanel, you will let us know when we can come back on here. I am going to just use this opportunity to, again, as I was talking about at the beginning, there I am. At the beginning of the show, my next live appearance is going to be Labor Day weekend in Exeter, New Hampshire. And I think this is the 10th year, or thereabouts, for the Exeter UFO Festival and Conference. Exeter, as many of you know, is a key location in UFO history. The incident at Exeter, very well documented by the great John Fuller, one of our best author journalists. And just up the road, the location where Betty and Barney Hill were taken. The Exeter itself, if you're not familiar with New Hampshire, which is a beautiful state, is archetypically classic New England. The town square where the event really is centered, it takes place in the town hall there, is like something out of a wonderful 19th century Currier and Ives print of New England in the mid-1800s. The town hall is, historic unto itself. It was built in 1860. It is kind of like an old Quaker meeting house, 3-sided balcony, simple, spare, but really well done. And it enters American history because in the autumn of 1860, or a bit earlier, when the presidential campaign, when candidates were stepping forward, the Republican Party, which was born in Exeter, New Hampshire, right around that time, put forward a candidate who America was not terribly aware of, who was from the Midwest. He spoke there, and Melinda's coming right back. And he had a chance to air his views, and that was Abraham Lincoln. And I think he went on to a fair amount of history. That's where we have the conference. Now,
sorry, momentary.
To the future. We only have one other image left, not two. Should I go to that?
Yes, go ahead real quick. Oh, and this is the same guy who had the boot print on his wall. So the previous picture was the military guy leaned up against the wall and left a boot print. So that's actually the boot print from the military abductor. And his brother was there to witness the whole thing. So it's, and then when the guy, now the brother gets drugged and left on the master bedroom. The brother comes to, sprawled out in the master bedroom on the bed, comes to from the drugs because his brother, who got taken, who is the head sheriff of 2 counties, a really credible guy, really credible case, is pounding on a sliding glass door off the master bedroom, not dressed, by the way, maybe just in his boxers, but pounding, trying to get back in. Okay. And the other guy comes to and lets him in. They immediately talk about it. The guy who's the head of 2 counties, like I said, in the experience, ended up getting punched in the groin because he had a disagreement with one of the guards in the experience. He developed a hernia. This is the x-ray in the medical report saying blunt force trauma because he got punched by the guard. And now he told the doctor when that he like tripped over furniture or something, but he actually got punched in the groin and developed a hernia by the guard that he had an argument with. I mean, he's the head sheriff of 2 counties. He's not going to take crap from one of these military guys, right? So he's having an argument with him. The guard and a group of people leave the room. When he's by himself, the guard comes back in the room and like sucker punches him. So there you go. And now let's go right away, because I know we only have a couple minutes more. Am I right?
We actually, yes, we're coming right into it.
Okay, let's play the 2 recordings really quick. If we've got like 5 minutes, I think we can cover both. I'd really like to. One is the Ron one. Yeah. Well, actually, no, in case we run out of time, let's do the video one first, which is...
Welcome to... No, hold it. That's not it.
Yeah.
Speak again. Melinda.
Yeah.
Oh, we couldn't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Over.
Okay.
Over.
Okay. So I'll explain it, then we'll show it, because I won't be able to talk during it. Okay.
Good.
So background explanation really quick. He's having a bunch of MILAB stuff happen, a bunch of covert human involvement. Okay. He sets up motion activated cameras in his house. He has one outside in his yard. The night before he shot this, okay, his motion activated camera in the yard is filming the side of his house. It has a window, like a slide glass door, and it has the front door. He's trying to catch the guys coming into the house, like how are they getting in? Okay. There's no sign of break-in, and this thing records these guys in the yard. So he gets them in, walking around in his yard, and then there's this weird technology thing that happens, and part of the wall has some weird displacement in time. And
we have got 90 seconds left, so let me just go to it.
Okay. The next night, he took out the video clip from that recorder, puts it next to his bed, tells his sister on the phone what happened, and says the video clip is next to my bed. He has like a chest of drawers thing next to his bed, and he puts the video
let me go
clip
right
in
to
there.
it.
Close that. That's
Melinda,
not it. Go back to the video.
We can't hear you again.
Go back to the video. Go back. Not that one. The video.
Okay. Again, talk or show the video. We got a minute.
I'll say it really quick. Really, before you start showing it, this is the guy. You see the reflection. This is a motion activated camera under his bed. It's in a housing, so it has a little bit of movement ability. So the camera has some movement ability. Motion activation goes on. He has a military guy show up in his room. You see the reflection in the fireplace on the wall, fireplace glass. You see the military guy come in, go and get the chip, put it in his pocket, and turn around, and then it shuts off. This motion activated camera was under his bed. Go ahead now.
And we are going to have
Okay,
to
so
call it a day on.
you saw the reflection in the screen, Peter, in the fireplace
Please,
screen, the guy moving around
just
the room.
give us your website where people can contact you.
Well, I just want to say real quick, that's amazing evidence. The guy goes, gets the chip, puts it in his pocket,
Melinda,
walks around the
we're out
room,
of time.
and I've had 2
Your
intelligence
website.
guys tell me that those were the shoes he has on are camouflage shoes. Okay, website is UFO Sighting Tours, tours with an S, plural, UFOsightingtours.com, and that's the
Thanks so
website for my
much.
tours and information. Although I need to update it, I have now done 1,550 tours. That's how many I've done.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Melinda Leslie, for being such a fascinating guest tonight. Next week's guest is author, playwright, novelist, and UFO's leading statistician, Cheryl Costa. If you have enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. See you next week. Stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other.
Thank you, Peter.